You win more battles with understanding than with strength. To master others, first observe them without judgment. Most speak too soon. The wise wait. Influence is a slow blade, sharpened by patience, directed by clarity. When you know what others seek, fear, and hide, you hold their strings. In this message, I will teach you the psychology behind control, persuasion, and strategic presence. Influence is not domination, it is direction, earned through awareness. Subscribe to our channel if you're ready to master your mind, and tell us, where are you watching from? The warrior who rushes into battle without studying the terrain dies quickly. The general who attacks without knowing his enemy's weaknesses fights blindly. Yet in the realm of influence, most people charge forward with words, assumptions, and desperate attempts to be heard. This is foolishness. True influence begins not with what you say, but with what you see. Before you can move another person's mind, you must first map its landscape. Every individual carries patterns, predictable responses, hidden fears, unspoken desires. These patterns are not secrets, they are written in plain sight for those who know how to observe. Watch their eyes when they speak of success. Do they look up and to the right, imagining a future they desperately want? Or do they glance away, embarrassed by dreams they believe are impossible? The direction of their gaze tells you whether they are motivated by possibility or paralyzed by doubt. Listen to their voice when they mention obstacles. Does it rise with excitement, seeing challenges as games to be won? Or does it drop heavy with the weight of past defeats? Their tone reveals whether they are builders or victims. Notice what they avoid discussing, the topics they skip over, the questions they deflect, the conversations they redirect. These silences are maps to their vulnerabilities. Most people believe their weaknesses are hidden. They are wrong. Weaknesses announce themselves through avoidance. Study their body when they interact with authority. Do they straighten, eager to prove themselves worthy of respect? Or do they shrink, carrying old wounds from those who held power over them? Their posture in the presence of hierarchy shows you exactly how to position yourself in their mind. Observe how they treat those who cannot help them. The waiter, the janitor, the person who serves them coffee. True character emerges when there is nothing to be gained. If they are dismissive or cruel to those beneath them, they respect only power. If they are kind, they can be influenced through genuine connection. Watch what makes them laugh. Humor reveals values. The person who laughs at others' misfortune has a cruel streak that can be exploited or avoided. The person who laughs at absurdity has intelligence that can be respected and engaged. The person who cannot laugh at themselves has an ego that must be carefully managed. Most people reveal everything within the first 10 minutes of meeting them. They tell you their dreams through their excitement, their fears through their hesitations, their values through their judgments, and their wounds through their defenses. But here is what most people do not understand. Observation without judgment is a skill that must be developed. The moment you decide someone is wrong, stupid, or inferior, you stop seeing them clearly. Judgment blinds perception. To influence effectively, you must observe like a scientist, not a critic. The person who interrupts constantly is not rude. They are insecure about being heard. The person who speaks too quietly is not weak. They are protecting themselves from rejection. The person who argues about everything is not difficult. They are desperate to feel intelligent and valued. When you see behavior as strategy rather than character, you gain the power to influence it. Every action serves a purpose in the actor's mind. Your job is not to judge the purpose, but to understand it. This understanding becomes leverage. Desire guides all decisions. If you can see what someone craves, you already hold influence over them. Words lie, actions reveal truth, but beneath both words and actions lies something more powerful: want. Not the surface desires people announce to the world, but the deep hungers that drive every choice they make. The executive says he wants to increase profits. What he truly wants is to prove his worth to a father who called him weak. The parent says she wants her children to succeed. What she truly wants is to correct the failures of her own childhood. The activist says he fights for justice. What he truly wants is to feel powerful after years of feeling helpless. When you mistake the stated goal for the real desire, you lose before you begin. Here is what most people do not understand. Every human being operates from a core set of hungers: security, recognition, connection, control, freedom, purpose. These drives are not optional. They are not preferences. They are necessities. And when you can identify which hunger dominates someone's psychology, you hold the key to their motivation. Watch the person who works 80-hour weeks. They claim dedication to excellence. But observe closer. Do they panic when emails go unanswered? Do they stay late even when the work is finished? This is not dedication. This is fear. They hunger for security, terrified that rest means irrelevance. Study the person who constantly shares their achievements on social media. They claim they want to inspire others. But notice the timing. Do they post immediately after moments of doubt? Do they seek validation most when they feel least confident? This is not inspiration. This is hunger for recognition, desperate to convince themselves they matter. Examine the person who gives excessive advice, even when none is requested. They claim they want to help. But observe the pattern. Do they feel most valuable when others need them? Do they struggle with their own problems while solving everyone else's? This is not generosity. This is hunger for purpose, seeking worth through utility. The skilled observer learns to see past the performance to the need beneath. But let me ask you this. How do you identify what someone truly wants when they themselves do not know? Most people are blind to their own deepest drives. They mistake symptoms for causes, effects for origins. Listen to their complaints. What they resent reveals what they desire. The person who constantly criticizes others for being fake craves authenticity. The person who attacks the wealthy desperately wants financial freedom. The person who mocks those in relationships hungers for connection but fears vulnerability. Watch their patterns of self-sabotage, the opportunities they refuse, the success they abandon, the happiness they destroy. These reveal the fears that override their conscious desires. The person who quits every job just before promotion fears responsibility more than they want advancement. The person who ends every relationship before it deepens fears, intimacy, more than they want love. Notice what they collect. Books they never read reveal intellectual insecurities. Expensive items they rarely use show status anxiety. Relationships they maintain but do not enjoy demonstrate fear of abandonment. Our possessions are monuments to our hungers. Study their heroes and villains. The people they admire represent who they wish to become. The people they despise represent who they fear they are. Both point to the same underlying desires. Observe their relationship with risk. Do they seek constant stimulation, revealing boredom, with ordinary life? Do they avoid all uncertainty, showing their hunger for control? Do they take foolish chances, demonstrating their need to feel alive? Risk tolerance maps directly to core psychological needs. Pay attention to their stories. Not the facts they report, but the narrative they create. Do they cast themselves as victim, revealing powerlessness? Do they position themselves as hero, showing their need for significance? Do they see themselves as rescuer, demonstrating their hunger to be needed? The story structure reveals the psychological structure. Watch their emotional reactions. What makes them angry? What makes them sad? What makes them afraid? Emotions are signals pointing toward threatened or unfulfilled desires. The person who rages at disrespect craves recognition. The person who mourns missed opportunities hungers for achievement. The person who fears change desperately needs security. But here is the crucial insight. Once you understand someone's core hunger, you can predict their choices before they make them. The person driven by security will always choose the safer path. The person motivated by recognition will always choose the more visible option. The person seeking connection will always prioritize relationships over achievement. This predictability becomes influence. Yet most people try to motivate others based on their own desires. The security-driven manager cannot understand why bonuses do not motivate the recognition-hungry employee. The connection-seeking parent cannot comprehend why their achievement-oriented child seems ungrateful for emotional support. You cannot influence someone by offering what you would want. You must offer what they hunger for. The person who craves security responds to guarantees, stability, and clear expectations. The person who needs recognition responds to praise, visibility, and status. The person who seeks connection responds to inclusion, understanding, and emotional resonance. Match. The message to the hunger and resistance dissolves. The strong shout. The wise listen. True influence is quiet, yet its effects are absolute. Power announces itself. It builds monuments to its own importance. It demands attention, respect, submission. Power needs you to know it exists. This is its weakness and your opportunity. Influence operates in silence. It plants seeds in minds that believe they are thinking their own thoughts. It shapes decisions while remaining invisible. It moves mountains while leaving no footprints. The most powerful influence is the influence that is never recognized as influence at all. Watch the loud manager who rules through fear. His authority ends the moment he leaves the room. His people comply in his presence and rebel in his absence. He must constantly remind others of his position because his position is all he has. Now observe the quiet leader who rarely gives direct orders. Instead, she asks questions that guide thinking. She shares observations that spark insights. She offers suggestions that feel like discoveries. Her influence grows stronger in her absence because it lives inside other minds. The difference is this: power controls behavior. Influence shapes thinking. Behavior can be forced, but only temporarily. Thinking, once changed, changes everything. Here is what most people do not understand. The moment you need to assert your authority, you have already lost it. True influence never announces itself because it never needs to. It works through attraction, not force, through curiosity, not commands, through invitation, not intimidation. The person who says, "I am important," is not. The person who insists, "You must respect me," will not be respected. The person who demands, "Listen to me," will be ignored the moment they stop speaking. But the person who earns attention through wisdom, who gains respect through value, who captures minds through insight, this person needs no announcement. Their influence spreads like water, finding every crack, filling every space, becoming essential to the very foundation of thought. Consider how influence actually works in the real world. The most powerful ideas rarely arrive with fanfare. They whisper into consciousness, gentle and persistent. Democracy was not imposed by force, but spread through conversation. Scientific breakthroughs were not commanded, but discovered through quiet observation. Cultural shifts happen not through proclamation, but through countless small influences accumulating over time. This is the master's way: to influence without appearing to influence, to lead without seeming to lead, to change minds while letting. Those minds believe they have changed themselves. But let me ask you this: why are people so drawn to loud displays of power when quiet influence is more effective? Because power provides immediate gratification. It feels good to command and be obeyed. It satisfies the ego to see others submit. It creates the illusion of control. Influence requires patience. It demands that you plant seeds without knowing when they will grow. It asks you to shape thinking without taking credit for the thoughts. It requires you to win without appearing to compete. Most people cannot tolerate this ambiguity. They need the immediate feedback that power provides. They want the visible proof that they matter. They crave the obvious signs of their impact. This impatience is their limitation and your advantage. While they shout for attention, you listen for understanding. While they demand compliance, you invite curiosity. While they push against resistance, you find the path of least resistance. While they exhaust themselves, forcing outcomes, you let outcomes unfold naturally. The art of quiet influence has specific techniques. Ask questions instead of making statements. Questions bypass resistance because they engage thinking rather than challenging beliefs. When you tell someone what to think, you trigger their defenses. When you ask them to think, you trigger their curiosity. Share stories instead of giving advice. Stories slip past mental barriers because they feel like entertainment, not instruction. A well-crafted story can plant an idea more effectively than an hour of direct argument. Use their language, not yours. Mirror their pace, their tone, their concerns. When people hear their own thoughts reflected back with slight modifications, they experience those modifications as their own insights. Agree before you redirect. Find something true in their position before offering an alternative perspective. Agreement disarms resistance. People are more open to new ideas when they feel understood about their current ones. Let them discover rather than teaching them directly. Arrange experiences that lead to the conclusions you want them to reach. Discovery feels like personal achievement. Teaching feels like submission. Build on their existing beliefs instead of challenging them. Find the thread that connects what they already accept to what you want them to consider. People resist foreign ideas, but embrace familiar ideas extended logically. The master of influence understands that the human mind is not a fortress to be conquered, but a garden to be cultivated. Gardens grow through careful tending, not violent. Overtaking, seeds planted with patience yield harvests that last for seasons. Ideas planted with subtlety become convictions that last for lifetimes. This is why influence whispers while power shouts. The whisper is designed to be heard by the mind within the mind, the part that processes, considers, and ultimately decides. The shout is designed to overwhelm and intimidate, but intimidation creates compliance, not conviction. And compliance without conviction is temporary at best. True influence creates believers, not followers. Fear clouds the mind, but when used wisely, it becomes a compass pointing to truth and motive. Fear is not your enemy. It is information. Every person carries fears that shape their every choice. These fears are not weaknesses to exploit. They are maps to navigate. The master of influence does not create fear. He recognizes the fear that already exists and uses it as a guide to understanding. Creating fear is the tool of tyrants. Recognizing fear is the tool of strategists. Watch the executive who works obsessively. He does not fear failure. He fears irrelevance. His terror is not that he will lose money, but that he will lose significance. When you speak to him about opportunity, frame it in terms of legacy. When you discuss risk, connect it to obsolescence. His fear of being forgotten drives every decision. Study the parent who controls every aspect of their child's life. They do not fear their child's failure. They fear their own inadequacy as a protector. Their terror is not that bad things will happen, but that they will be powerless to prevent them. When you address their parenting, acknowledge their dedication first. When you suggest alternatives, emphasize their child's safety and their role. In providing it, observe the person who avoids commitment in relationships. They do not fear love. They fear abandonment. Their terror is not intimacy itself, but the vulnerability that intimacy requires. When you discuss their patterns, do not challenge their independence. Instead, explore how their protective strategies might be limiting their deepest desires. Fear reveals what matters most to someone. It shows you exactly what they cannot afford to lose and what they desperately want to gain. This knowledge is the foundation of ethical influence. But here's what most people do not understand. Fear is not the opposite of desire. Fear is desire. In reverse, we fear losing what we value. We fear not obtaining what we crave. Every fear points directly to a corresponding want. The person who fears poverty values security above all else. The person who fears rejection craves acceptance more than anything. The person who fears being ordinary hungers for significance. The person who fears being controlled desperately wants freedom. When you understand someone's fears, you understand their entire value system. Yet most people try to eliminate fear rather than understand it. They tell the anxious person to stop worrying. They instruct the cautious person to take risks. They advise the perfectionist to accept good enough. This approach fails because it ignores the intelligence within fear. Fear is not irrational. It is protective. It guards against threats the conscious mind might miss. The executive's fear of irrelevance protects him from complacency. The parent's fear of inadequacy protects their child from neglect. The commitment-avoidant person's fear of abandonment protects them from devastating loss. The skilled influencer does not dismiss these protective mechanisms. Instead, he works with them. But let me ask you this. How do you leverage fear without becoming manipulative? The key lies in direction, not creation. You do not manufacture new fears. You help people address the fears they already carry. When someone fears failure, you do not threaten them with failure. You show them how your proposal helps them succeed. When someone fears rejection, you do not threaten them with isolation. You demonstrate how your idea helps them connect. When someone fears loss of control, you do not threaten them with chaos. You prove how your approach gives them more influence over their circumstances. This is ethical influence, using fear as a compass, not a weapon. Watch how the master salesperson operates. They do not create fear of missing out. They recognize the fear that already exists. The customer who cannot make a decision is not indecisive. They are afraid of making the wrong choice. The skilled salesperson addresses this fear directly by reducing risk, providing guarantees, and sharing stories of others who made similar decisions successfully. Study how the effective leader motivates their team. They do not threaten consequences for poor performance. They recognize the fear of letting others down that already motivates their people. They frame challenges in terms of serving teammates, protecting the mission, and maintaining reputation. They leverage existing fears in service of shared goals. Examine how the wise parent guides their child. They do not create fear of punishment. They recognize the child's existing fear of disappointing those they love. They connect desired behaviors to the child's own values and concerns. They help the child see how good choices serve their own interests and relationships. The difference between manipulation and influence is this. Manipulation creates fear where none existed. Influence acknowledges fear that is already present and helps people navigate it constructively. Fear reveals priorities. When someone is afraid of losing their job, work is their priority. When someone is afraid of losing their health, wellness becomes their focus. When someone is afraid of losing their family, relationships drive their choices. These priorities are your influence points, not because you threaten what they value, but because you protect what they value. Not because you endanger what matters to them, but because you help them secure what matters to them. The person driven by fear of financial insecurity will listen carefully to ideas about building wealth, creating multiple income streams, and developing valuable skills. The person motivated by fear of health problems will pay attention to suggestions about nutrition, exercise, and medical care. The person concerned about relationship stability will consider advice about communication, conflict resolution, and emotional intelligence. Fear, properly understood, becomes your ally in influence. It tells you exactly what someone cares about most deeply. It shows you precisely how to frame your message for maximum impact. It reveals the emotional core that drives their rational decisions. But remember, the goal is not to exploit fear, but to address it. When you help someone manage their fears constructively, you gain their trust. When you show them how to protect what they value, you earn their loyalty. When you guide them toward security rather than toward terror, you become a valuable ally rather than a dangerous adversary. Influence begins not with argument, but with context. Set the terms before others even speak. The battle is won before it begins, not through superior force, but through superior positioning. In warfare, terrain determines outcome. In influence, context determines perception. The general who chooses the battlefield holds the decisive advantage. Most people enter conversations hoping to win through better arguments. This is like arriving at a location chosen by your opponent and expecting victory through superior weapons. You have already lost by accepting their terms of engagement. The master of influence never fights on foreign ground. Instead, he shapes the context before the conversation begins. He defines the problem, establishes the criteria for success, and sets the boundaries of acceptable solutions. By the time others begin to speak, the outcome is already determined. Consider how this works in practice. The employee who wants a raise does not simply ask for more money. First, she documents her contributions, researches market rates, and schedules the conversation after a major success. She frames the discussion around fairness, market value, and retention rather than personal need. Before her manager can object, she has already established the criteria by which the decision should be made. Watch the skilled negotiator. He does not begin with his offer. Instead, he establishes the value of what he is providing, the cost of alternatives, and the urgency of the decision. He frames the negotiation as a problem to be solved together, rather than a battle to be won. By the time numbers are discussed, the context has already justified his position. Study the effective parent. She does not simply impose rules. Instead, she helps her children understand the reasoning behind expectations, the consequences of poor choices, and the benefits of good decisions. She frames discipline as protection and guidance rather than control. The children comply not because they must, but because they understand why they should. Here is what most people do not understand. The person who sets the frame controls the conversation, regardless of who talks the most. Frame is more powerful than content. Context shapes perception more than facts shape conclusions. When you allow others to define the terms of discussion, you give them control over the outcome. When you accept their problem definition, you limit yourself to their range of solutions. When you operate within their time constraints, you surrender your strategic advantage. But let me ask you this. How do you establish frame without appearing controlling or manipulative? The key is to frame situations in terms of shared values and mutual benefit rather than personal advantage. The effective leader does not say, "We must do this because I said so." Instead, she says, "Given our commitment to excellence and our responsibility to our customers, what approach best serves our mission?" She frames decisions in terms of shared values, making resistance feel like betrayal of common goals. The skilled salesperson does not say, "You should buy this product." Instead, he says, "Based on the criteria you mentioned, quality, reliability, and value, let's examine which option best meets your needs." He frames the decision around the customer's own stated priorities, making the sale feel like their own logical conclusion. The wise negotiator does not say, "This is my final offer." Instead, she says, "Given the constraints we both face and the outcome we both want, this appears to be the solution that works for everyone." She frames agreement as mutual success rather than individual victory. The power of framing lies in its ability to make your preferred outcome seem inevitable, logical, and beneficial to everyone involved. When you frame situations correctly, people do not feel influenced, they feel enlightened. There are specific techniques for establishing effective frames. Start with shared values. Before discussing specifics, establish the principles that everyone agrees on. When you root your argument in values that your audience already holds, resistance becomes inconsistent with their own beliefs. Define the problem before offering solutions. People who accept your problem definition will naturally gravitate toward your preferred solutions. Spend time ensuring everyone understands the situation the same way before proposing remedies. Establish criteria for success. What would a good outcome look like? What standards should guide the decision? When you set the benchmarks, your solution becomes the obvious choice. Create urgency around the right priorities. What happens if action is delayed? What opportunities might be lost? When you control the timeline, you control the pressure points. Limit the range of acceptable options. Present a few carefully chosen alternatives rather than unlimited possibilities. When you curate the choices, you guide the decision without appearing to dictate it. Use language that assumes agreement. Speak in terms of when we implement this rather than if you choose this. Assume cooperation rather than resistance. Make your preferred outcome feel inevitable. Appeal to identity and reputation. Frame decisions in terms of what kind of person makes what kind of choice. People will act consistently with their self-image, especially when others are watching. But remember, effective framing serves everyone involved. The best frames align individual interests with collective benefit. They make the right choice. Also, the easy choice. They create situations where doing what you want them to do also serves their own genuine interests. Poor framing tries to trick people into acting against their interests. This approach eventually fails because reality catches up with perception. Good framing helps people see how their interests align with your interests. This approach succeeds because it reflects genuine mutual benefit. The master of influence understands that context is everything. Change the frame, and you change the game. Control the frame, and you control the outcome. Set the terms of engagement, and victory becomes inevitable. This is not manipulation. It is leadership. The person who can see the bigger picture, identify the real issues, and establish the appropriate context provides value to everyone involved. They make better decisions possible by clarifying what the decision is really about. Do not command, guide. The right question turns resistance into surrender. The general who issues orders creates soldiers. The general who asks questions creates strategists. Commands tell people what to think. Questions teach people how to think. And the person who controls how someone thinks controls what they will conclude. Most people believe influence requires answers. This is backwards. Influence requires better questions. The right question at the right moment can topple an empire of false beliefs. The wrong answer to any question will be forgotten within hours. Watch the master teacher. She does not lecture students about complex concepts. Instead, she asks questions that lead students to discover the concepts themselves. What do you notice about these examples? What pattern do you see? What would happen if we changed this variable? The students believe they are learning through their own intelligence. They are, but the teacher is guiding that intelligence toward specific insights. Study the skilled therapist. He does not tell clients what their problems are or how to solve them. Instead, he asks questions that help clients see their situations more clearly. How did that make you feel? What do you think that pattern reveals? What would change if you approached this differently? The clients believe they are discovering their own truths. They are, but the therapist is directing their attention toward healing perspectives. Observe the effective parent. She does not simply tell her teenager what to do. Instead, she asks questions that help the teenager think through consequences. What do you think might happen if you choose that path? How would you feel if someone treated you that way? What kind of person do you want to become? The teenager believes he is making his own decisions. He is, but the parent is shaping the thinking process that leads to those decisions. This is the power of questions. They bypass resistance by engaging participation. When you tell someone something, you trigger their defenses. When you ask them something, you trigger their curiosity. Defense resists. Curiosity explores. Here is what most people do not understand. The human mind cannot resist a well-crafted question. Questions create mental gaps that demand completion. They open psychological loops that the mind feels compelled to close. They activate the thinking process whether the person wants to think or not. But not all questions create influence. Poor questions reveal your agenda too clearly. They feel like manipulation disguised as inquiry. Don't you think you should? Is not a question. It is a command wearing question marks. Wouldn't it be better if? Is not curiosity. It is persuasion pretending to be open-minded. Effective questions feel genuinely curious. They seem to seek understanding rather than agreement. They invite exploration rather than demanding specific answers. They make people feel heard rather than hunted. But let me ask you this. How do you craft questions that guide thinking without revealing your destination? The key is to focus on process rather than outcome. Instead of asking questions designed to get specific answers, ask questions designed to improve thinking. What factors are you considering in this decision? This question does not push toward any particular choice. Instead, it encourages more thorough analysis. As the person examines factors they had not considered, their decision naturally becomes more informed. What would success look like in this situation? This question does not advocate for any specific strategy. Instead, it clarifies goals. As the person defines success more precisely, effective strategies become more obvious. What has worked for you in similar situations? This question does not impose external solutions. Instead, it draws on existing wisdom. As the person remembers their own past successes, confidence and clarity increase. What concerns you most about this approach? This question does not dismiss objections. Instead, it makes them explicit. As concerns are voiced, they can be addressed directly rather than remaining as hidden resistance. The master of questions understands that people resist conclusions but embrace discoveries. When you tell someone they are wrong, they defend their position. When you ask questions that help them see the flaws in their position themselves, they change their minds voluntarily. Questions also reveal information that statements cannot. When you make assertions, people either agree or disagree. When you ask questions, people expose their thinking process, their priorities, their fears, and their desires. This information becomes the foundation for more precise influence. What matters most to you about this decision reveals values. What concerns you about the current situation exposes fears. What would you do if you had unlimited resources uncovers desires. What has been your experience with similar challenges? Shows past patterns and learned responses. The strategic questioner does not ask random inquiries. Every question serves a purpose: to gather information, to shift perspective, to reveal assumptions, to clarify thinking, or to guide attention toward specific insights. The sequence of questions matters as much as the content. Start with broad, comfortable questions that establish rapport and gather general information. Move gradually toward more specific, challenging questions that address the core issues. End with forward-looking questions that encourage action and commitment. Questions are the scalpel of influence, precise, subtle, and remarkably effective when wielded with skill. No mind can be shaped without trust, and trust is built in silence, small actions, and patience. Trust is the foundation of all influence. Without it, your words carry no weight. Your ideas face immediate resistance. Your suggestions are met with suspicion. But with trust, your casual observations become profound insights. Your gentle suggestions become urgent priorities. Your quiet confidence becomes unshakable authority. Most people try to establish trust through grand gestures and impressive credentials. They announce their achievements, display their expertise, and demonstrate their capabilities. This approach fails because trust is not built through performance. It is built through consistency. Trust accumulates through small, repeated demonstrations of reliability. The manager who remembers personal details about each employee. The friend who shows up exactly when promised. The advisor who admits when they do not know something rather than pretending omniscience. These micro-behaviors create the foundation upon which major influence becomes possible. Watch how trust actually develops in relationships. It begins with tiny risks and tiny proofs. Someone shares a minor concern, and you respond with understanding rather than judgment. Someone admits a small mistake, and you react with support rather than criticism. Someone reveals a modest hope, and you encourage rather than dismiss. Each positive interaction makes the next disclosure more likely. Each supportive response increases the depth of future sharing. Each demonstration of reliability expands the scope of potential influence. But here is what most people do not understand. Trust is not about being liked. Trust is about being predictable. People trust those whose responses they can anticipate. They open themselves to those who have proven themselves safe through consistent behavior over time. The person who is always positive cannot be trusted with negative emotions. The person who constantly agrees cannot be trusted with honest feedback. The person who never admits uncertainty cannot be trusted with complex problems. Trust requires authentic responses, not perfect responses. Study the components of trustworthiness. Competence, the ability to deliver what you promise. Character, the commitment to act in others' interests, not just your own. Care, the genuine concern for others' well-being. Consistency, the reliability of behavior across different situations and over time. Most people focus on demonstrating competence. They want others to know how skilled, experienced, and capable they are. But competence without character creates fear, not trust. People may respect your abilities while questioning your motives. Character without competence creates affection, not influence. People may like you while doubting your ability to help them achieve their goals. Care without consistency creates confusion, not confidence. People may appreciate your concern while uncertain whether it will continue. But let me ask you this: how do you build trust without appearing desperate for approval? The key is to focus on serving others' interests rather than managing their perceptions of you. Listen more than you speak. Ask about their challenges, goals, and concerns. Show genuine interest in their perspective. People trust those who seek to understand them more than those who seek to impress them. Keep commitments, especially small ones. If you say you will call tomorrow, call tomorrow. If you promise to send information, send it promptly. If you agree to arrive at a specific time, arrive on time. Trust is built on the foundation of countless small promises kept. Admit your limitations honestly. When you do not know something, say so. When you make a mistake, acknowledge it quickly. When you are uncertain about an outcome, express that uncertainty. Honesty about weaknesses paradoxically increases confidence in your strengths. Share appropriate vulnerability. Reveal struggles you have overcome, lessons you have learned from failure, areas where you continue to grow. Vulnerability creates connection, and connection enables trust. Demonstrate consistency between your stated values and your actual behavior. If you claim to value honesty, tell the truth even when it is uncomfortable. If you say you prioritize family, make decisions that support that priority. If you advocate for excellence, maintain high standards in your own work. Protect confidences absolutely. Never share private information, even harmlessly. Never use someone's trust as social currency to gain attention or status. Once you prove you can keep secrets, people will share more significant secrets. Support others' success without expecting credit. Celebrate their achievements, advocate for their recognition, and create opportunities for them to shine. People trust those who genuinely want them to succeed. The timeline of trust cannot be rushed. It develops through accumulated evidence over extended periods. Attempting to accelerate trust through intensity or manipulation destroys the very foundation you are trying to build. But once trust exists, influence becomes natural. Trusted advisors do not need to persuade. They need only to suggest. Their recommendations carry weight. because their judgment has been proven reliable. Their perspectives are valued because their motivations are understood to be pure. Trust transforms the entire dynamic of communication. Instead of selling ideas, you are sharing insights. Instead of overcoming resistance, you are exploring possibilities. Instead of competing for attention, you are collaborating on solutions. The person who has earned trust can influence with whispers where others fail with shouts. They can shift perspectives with questions where others fail with arguments. They can create change with patience where others fail with pressure. This is why the master of influence invests heavily in trust before attempting any significant persuasion. They understand that trust is not a nice-to-have addition to influence. It is the prerequisite for influence. Without trust, all techniques fail. With trust, simple honesty becomes more powerful than sophisticated manipulation. Build trust first. Everything else becomes possible afterward. The loudest man reveals the most weakness. Insecurity is a map to control. Confidence whispers. Insecurity shouts. The person who truly possesses power, skill, or worth rarely needs to announce it. But the person who lacks these qualities, or fears they lack them, broadcasts their desperation through every word and gesture. This desperation is information. It tells you exactly what they wish they had, what they fear they lack, and what they will do to obtain or protect. Insecurity is not a character flaw to judge. It is intelligence to gather. Watch the executive who constantly mentions his prestigious university, expensive car, and important connections. He is not sharing information. He is seeking validation. Each status symbol he displays reveals an inner doubt about his worth. His insecurity about intelligence drives the university references. His insecurity about success drives the wealth displays. His insecurity about importance drives the name dropping. Study the person who interrupts constantly, speaks too loudly, and dominates every conversation. She is not confident. She is terrified of being overlooked. Her aggressive communication style masks deep fears about her relevance and value. She talks over others not because she believes her ideas are superior, but because she fears they are inferior. Observe the individual who criticizes everyone else's work, questions every decision, and finds flaws in every plan. He is not being thorough. He is being defensive. His criticism of others deflects attention from his own inadequacies. His negativity protects him from the vulnerability of offering his own ideas for evaluation. These behaviors are not random. They are strategies. Unsuccessful strategies, but strategies nonetheless. Each insecure behavior serves a psychological purpose: to gain validation, avoid exposure, or maintain the illusion of competence. Here is what most people do not understand. Insecurity makes people predictable. The insecure person will always choose the path that protects their self-image over the path that serves their actual interests. They will sacrifice real success to avoid perceived failure. They will choose familiar dysfunction over uncertain growth. This predictability becomes leverage. The employee who desperately wants to be seen as indispensable will volunteer for every project, work excessive hours, and resist delegating tasks. His insecurity about job security drives him to behaviors that actually limit his advancement. When you understand this pattern, you can influence him by framing opportunities in terms of becoming more valuable and irreplaceable. The manager who needs to be perceived as always having the answers will resist admitting uncertainty, asking for help, or learning new approaches. Her insecurity about expertise drives her to behaviors that actually limit her effectiveness. When you recognize this pattern, you can influence her by presenting your ideas as ways to demonstrate her wisdom and leadership. The entrepreneur who fears being seen as unsuccessful will make decisions based on appearance rather than substance. He will choose the flashy option over the profitable one, the visible path over the strategic one. His insecurity about status drives him toward choices that often undermine his actual success. But let me ask you this: how do you leverage insecurity without exploiting or harming the insecure person? The key is to help them meet their psychological needs in ways that also serve legitimate purposes. The status-conscious person needs recognition. Give them credit for good ideas, highlight their contributions in public, and create opportunities for them to showcase their expertise. When their need for validation is met appropriately, they become more secure and more effective. The control-obsessed person needs influence. Give them responsibility for important decisions, ask for their input on strategic matters, and position them as key stakeholders in outcomes. When their need for power is channeled constructively, they become valuable collaborators rather than obstacles. The attention-seeking person needs significance. Give them platforms to share their knowledge, roles that utilize their unique strengths, and projects that highlight their capabilities. When their need for importance is fulfilled through meaningful contribution, they stop competing destructively for notice. The master of influence sees insecurity as opportunity, not for manipulation, but for transformation. Insecure people become loyal allies when you help them address their underlying needs. They become fierce advocates when you provide them with legitimate sources of confidence. Study the specific manifestations of different insecurities. Intellectual insecurity shows up as over-explanation, excessive jargon, and constant references to credentials or achievements. These people respond to respect for their intelligence and opportunities to demonstrate their expertise. Social insecurity appears as attention-seeking behavior, name-dropping, and desperate attempts to be liked by everyone. These people respond to genuine inclusion, private recognition, and stable relationships. Professional insecurity manifests as workaholism, micromanagement, and resistance to feedback or change. These people respond to acknowledgement of their contributions, clear expectations, and job security. Financial insecurity creates obsession with money, status symbols, and constant comparison to others' wealth. These people respond to opportunities for advancement, financial education, and long-term security planning. Physical insecurity generates obsession with appearance, health anxiety, and comparison to others' attractiveness or fitness. These people respond to acceptance, health support, and focus on non-physical qualities. The key insight is this: insecurity is not permanent. It is a response to unmet needs and unhealed wounds. When you address the underlying needs constructively, insecurity diminishes. When insecurity diminishes, the person becomes more capable, more confident, and more influential themselves. This is ethical influence, using understanding of insecurity to help people become more secure, not more vulnerable. The goal is not to exploit weakness, but to build strength, not to maintain dependence, but to develop capability. The most powerful influence comes from helping insecure people discover their genuine strengths and address their real limitations. When you become the person who helps others feel more confident and capable, your influence grows exponentially. They trust you because you have proven yourself safe with their vulnerabilities. They value you because you have helped them become better versions of themselves. Words can entangle, silence can trap. Let them fill the air and reveal what they fear you will find. Silence is the most underestimated weapon in the arsenal of influence. While others rush to fill every pause with noise, the master of persuasion understands that emptiness creates pressure, and pressure creates revelation. Most people fear silence. They interpret pauses as judgment, gaps as disapproval, and quiet as rejection. This fear drives them to speak when they should listen, to explain when they should wait, and to reveal when they should conceal. Their discomfort with silence becomes your advantage. Watch what happens in a negotiation when one party simply stops talking. The other person, unable to tolerate the void, begins to make concessions, offer additional information, or reveal their true position. They speak not because they have something valuable to say, but because silence feels like a threat they must neutralize. Study the skilled interrogator. They ask a question and then wait. The guilty person, unnerved by the silence, begins to elaborate, explain, and eventually contradict themselves. The innocent person simply answers and waits calmly for the next question. Silence reveals truth more reliably than pressure reveals lies. Observe the effective therapist. They create space for clients to explore their own thoughts rather than filling that space with advice or interpretation. In the silence, people discover insights they never knew they possessed. They solve problems they thought required external solutions. They find clarity that no amount of guidance could provide. Here is what most people do not understand. Silence is not passive. It is actively creating conditions for others to reveal themselves. It is strategically withholding your position so others must expose theirs. It is deliberately creating psychological pressure that compels disclosure. But silence is not simply the absence of speech. Strategic silence is purposeful, timed, and positioned for maximum effect. The pause after a difficult question forces deeper consideration. Most people give superficial answers to avoid thinking about uncomfortable topics. When you ask a challenging question and then wait silently, they cannot escape with quick deflections. The silence demands a real response. The pause after someone makes a statement allows them to hear their own words. Often, people speak without thinking. When you remain silent after they finish, they begin to evaluate what they just said. Sometimes they correct themselves. Sometimes they elaborate. Sometimes they contradict themselves. Always they reveal more than they intended. The pause before you respond shows that you are considering their words carefully. This silence communicates respect and thoughtfulness. It makes your eventual response carry more weight because it feels considered rather than reactive. But let me ask you this. Why does silence create such powerful psychological pressure? Because humans are social creatures who interpret silence as potential rejection or disapproval. In uncertain situations, people default to seeking approval and avoiding judgment. Silence feels like potential judgment, so they speak to earn approval. This is not manipulation. It is utilization of natural human tendencies. You are not creating artificial pressure. You are simply not relieving the pressure that already exists. The master of strategic silence understands timing. There are moments when silence amplifies influence and moments when it diminishes connection. The key is knowing which moments are which. Use silence after making an important point. Let your words settle into their mind without immediately diluting them with additional commentary. Give your ideas time to be considered and absorbed. Use silence after asking for commitment. When you request a decision, agreement, or action, stop talking. Let them process the request and respond. Do not help them find reasons to say no by continuing to talk. Use silence when others are emotional. Angry people need to vent before they can listen. Sad people need to feel heard before they can think clearly. Excited people need to express their enthusiasm before they can focus on details. Silence creates space for emotions to be expressed and processed. Use silence when you are emotional. When you feel angry, defensive, or reactive, silence prevents you from saying something you will regret. It gives you time to respond thoughtfully instead of reacting impulsively. But avoid silence when building rapport or when others are anxious about the relationship. In these moments, silence can be interpreted as rejection or disinterest. Use silence strategically, not automatically. The power of silence extends beyond conversations. Silent observation reveals patterns that constant interaction would miss. When you stop talking and start watching, you notice body language, energy shifts, group dynamics, and unspoken communication. Silent presence can be more influential than active participation. The person who listens intently while others debate often becomes the one everyone turns to for final wisdom. They have heard all perspectives, avoided taking premature positions, and can offer synthesis rather than opinion. Strategic silence also includes knowing when not to respond to provocation, when not to defend yourself against criticism, and when not to fill awkward social moments with nervous chatter. The person who masters silence gains several advantages. They gather more information because others feel compelled to share. They avoid revealing their position prematurely, maintaining negotiating flexibility. They appear thoughtful and wise because silence is associated with depth and consideration, most. Importantly, they become comfortable with discomfort. While others rush to escape awkward moments, the master of silence can sit calmly in tension. This comfort with discomfort becomes a source of power in any situation where others feel pressured. To act quickly, silence is not the absence of influence. It is influence refined to its purest form. Every person has a pattern. When you interrupt it, you create space for suggestion. Human beings are creatures of rhythm. They speak at predictable paces, think in familiar patterns, and respond through habitual sequences. These rhythms create comfort and efficiency, but they also create vulnerability. When you can read someone's rhythm and strategically interrupt it, you create moments of openness where new ideas can enter. Watch how people process information. Some need time to consider before responding. Others think out loud as they speak. Some analyze details methodically. Others grasp concepts intuitively. These processing rhythms are not preferences. They are psychological necessities that shape how information is received and integrated. Study how people make decisions. Some gather extensive data before choosing. Others trust their initial instincts. Some seek multiple opinions. Others prefer to decide independently. When you understand someone's decision rhythm, you can present information in sync with their natural process or strategically disrupt it to create new possibilities. Observe how people handle stress. Some become more focused under pressure. Others scatter their attention. Some seek support from others. Others withdraw into solitude. These stress rhythms reveal both vulnerabilities and strengths that can be leveraged for influence. Here is what most people do not understand. When you match someone's rhythm initially, you build rapport and trust. When you then strategically break that rhythm, you create heightened attention and openness to new input. The interruption becomes significant precisely because it contrasts with the established pattern. Consider the fast-talking, high-energy person who is accustomed to rapid exchanges and quick decisions. If you initially match their pace, they feel understood and comfortable. But if you then slow down dramatically during a crucial point, they are forced to slow down with you. In that moment of altered rhythm, your words carry unusual weight. Study the methodical, analytical person who typically processes information slowly and thoroughly. If you respect their need for detail initially, you build credibility. But if you then introduce urgency, we need to decide this today because of an unexpected opportunity, you disrupt their normal processing rhythm and create pressure for the faster decision-making. Observe the emotionally expressive person who typically processes through talking and feeling. If you listen and validate their emotions initially, you establish connection. But if you then shift to logical analysis, let's look at this objectively, you interrupt their emotional rhythm and redirect them toward rational consideration. But let me ask you this: how do you interrupt patterns without creating resistance or confusion? The key is to break rhythm intentionally and temporarily, not randomly or permanently. You disrupt to redirect, not to destroy. Use pattern interrupts during natural transition points. When someone finishes explaining their position, pauses to think, or asks a question, you can shift the rhythm without jarring them. These transition moments are natural places for change in pace, tone, or direction. Change your physical position or energy level. If the conversation has been seated and calm, stand up and become more animated. If the exchange has been standing and intense, sit down and become more relaxed. Physical changes naturally alter conversational rhythm, shift between different communication styles, move from questions to statements, from abstract concepts to specific examples, from logical analysis to emotional appeal. These stylistic changes break established patterns and create new engagement, introduce unexpected elements, share a relevant story, ask an unrelated question, or make an observation about the environment. These interruptions break the current thought pattern and create space for new directions. Alter your response timing. If you have been responding quickly, take a long pause. If you have been reflective, respond immediately. Changes in timing disrupt expectations and heighten attention. The master of rhythm understands that people become hypnotized by their own patterns. They fall into familiar ways of thinking, feeling, and responding that limit their ability to consider alternatives. By strategically breaking these patterns, you free them to think differently. This technique is particularly powerful in negotiations. When discussions become stuck in repetitive cycles, the same arguments, objections, and responses, pattern interruption can break the deadlock. A sudden shift in approach, tone, or focus can move negotiations from conflict to collaboration. In sales, rhythm breaks can overcome objections that have become automatic. When potential customers give familiar reasons for not buying, they are operating from rehearsed scripts. Pattern interruption forces them out of these scripts and into fresh consideration. In leadership, rhythm changes can energize teams that have become complacent or redirect groups that are moving in unproductive directions. A leader who typically uses one communication style but strategically shifts to another creates renewed attention and engagement. But remember, the goal is not to confuse or disorient people. The goal is to create brief moments of heightened receptivity where new ideas can be introduced effectively. The pattern break should serve a purpose, not simply demonstrate your ability to be unpredictable. The most effective rhythm breaks feel natural rather than forced. They emerge from genuine responsiveness to the situation rather than mechanical application of technique. When you truly listen to others and respond authentically to what you hear, natural rhythm changes occur organically. Watch for signs that indicate when someone's rhythm has been successfully interrupted. They pause longer than usual. Ask questions they had not considered before. Express uncertainty where they previously seemed certain, or shift their body language noticeably. These signals indicate that their normal patterns have been disrupted and they are open to new input. The person who masters rhythm and pattern interruption gains significant influence because they can move conversations out of stuck places and into new possibilities. They become valuable in situations where traditional approaches have failed and fresh perspectives are needed. Influence does not force, it seeds. Praise their behavior subtly, and you will shape their identity. Identity drives behavior more powerfully than reward drives action. When someone believes they are a certain type of person, they will act consistently with that identity, even when it requires sacrifice. But when they act only for external rewards, their behavior stops the moment rewards cease. This is why praise is more influential than payment. Money changes behavior temporarily. Praise changes identity permanently. And identity change creates permanent behavior change. Most people use praise carelessly. They offer generic compliments that carry no weight. Good job. Well done. Nice. Work. These empty phrases create no lasting impact because they contain no specific identity message. Strategic praise is different. It identifies specific behaviors and connects them to admirable character traits. Instead of saying, "good presentation," the master of influence says, "The way you handled that difficult question showed real wisdom under pressure." This praise does more than acknowledge performance. It defines identity. Watch what happens when you praise someone's character rather than their achievement. You really are someone who thinks things through carefully is more powerful than "you did a good analysis." The first statement tells them who they are. The second statement tells them what they did. People will change their behavior to match who they believe they are. Study the difference between praise for results and praise for process. "You're so smart" focuses on a fixed trait. "You really thought creatively about that problem" focuses on a learnable behavior. Process praise encourages continued effort and growth. Trait praise creates pressure to maintain an image. Observe how identity-based praise spreads through behavior. When you tell someone they are thoughtful, they begin to act more thoughtfully. In all situations, when you identify them as reliable, they become more reliable across all commitments. When you characterize them as innovative, they start generating more creative solutions. Here is what most people do not understand. The praise you give shapes not only how people see themselves, but how they see their potential. When you consistently identify positive qualities in someone, you expand their sense of what is possible for them. But let me ask you this: how do you use praise strategically without seeming manipulative or insincere? The key is to praise qualities that genuinely exist but may be underdeveloped or unrecognized. You are not creating false identities. You are amplifying authentic strengths. Look for positive behaviors that others might miss or dismiss. The quiet person who speaks up once during a meeting showed courage. The impatient person who waited for someone to finish speaking demonstrated respect. The critical person who offered encouragement revealed their caring nature. When you notice and name these positive behaviors, you accomplish three things simultaneously. First, you reinforce the behavior, making it more likely to recur. Second, you help the person recognize their own capabilities. Third, you establish yourself as someone who sees the best in others. Use identity language consistently. Instead of "that was creative," say "you have a creative mind." Instead of "you handled that well," say "you're really good under pressure." Instead of "thanks for helping," say "you're such a generous person." This language shifts focus from individual actions to character patterns. Connect present behavior to future potential. The leadership you showed in that situation suggests you have real management potential. The way you solved that problem makes me think you could handle much bigger challenges. This type of praise plants seeds of expanded identity. Praise effort and strategy, not just outcomes. I admire how thoroughly you prepared for that presentation. Reinforces the process that creates success. The way you stayed calm during that conflict shows real emotional intelligence, identifies a valuable skill that can be developed further. Be specific about what you observed. Vague praise feels hollow. Specific praise feels authentic and meaningful. You really listened to what she was saying before responding, and I could see she felt heard is more powerful than "you're a good listener." The timing of praise matters tremendously. Immediate praise, given right after positive behavior, has maximum impact on identity formation. Delayed praise loses much of its power to shape self-perception. Private praise often carries more weight than public praise. When you pull someone aside to acknowledge their character or capabilities, it feels more genuine and less performative. The master of influence understands that people become what they are consistently told they are, especially when that message comes from someone they respect. When you regularly identify positive qualities in others, you become a powerful force for their development and transformation. This is not manipulation, it is cultivation. You are helping people recognize and develop their best qualities. You are expanding their sense of identity in positive directions. You are planting seeds that grow into lasting behavioral change. The person who masters strategic praise gains influence because they become associated with others' growth and self-improvement. People value those who help them see themselves more positively and reach their potential more fully. People move for feeling, but stay for reason. Influence requires both, the wave and the stone. Emotion creates movement. Logic creates commitment. One without the other fails completely. Pure emotion burns bright, but burns out quickly. Pure logic convinces the mind, but never moves the heart. The master of influence uses emotion to initiate action and logic to sustain it. Watch how people actually make decisions. They feel their way toward a choice, then use reasoning to justify it. The expensive purchase feels right in the store, then gets rationalized at home. The career change feels necessary in the moment, then gets explained to friends and family. The relationship decision feels clear emotionally, then gets defended intellectually. This is not weakness. This is how human psychology operates. Emotion provides the energy for change. Logic provides the structure for stability. Both are necessary for lasting influence. Study the most persuasive messages in history. They begin with emotional impact, stories that touch the heart, images that stir passion, visions that inspire hope. But they conclude with logical frameworks, reasons that justify action, evidence that supports conclusions, systems that organize thinking. The civil rights movement succeeded because it combined emotional appeal with logical argument. The images of injustice stirred passion for change. The legal and moral reasoning provided frameworks for implementing that change. Neither alone would have created lasting transformation. Observe how effective leaders motivate their teams. They paint inspiring visions of the future, emotional destinations that people want to reach. But they also provide clear strategies, measurable goals, and logical systems, rational pathways that people can follow. Vision without strategy creates frustration. Strategy without vision creates apathy. Here is what most people do not understand: emotion and logic must be sequenced correctly for maximum influence. Start with emotion to create movement, then provide logic to justify and sustain that movement. Reverse the sequence, and you lose both impact and commitment. Consider the person who begins with statistics, facts, and rational analysis. The logical argument may be sound, but it generates no emotional energy for action. The audience understands intellectually, but feels no urgency to change. Logic without emotional foundation creates informed inaction. But observe what happens when emotion comes first. The stirring story, the compelling vision, the moving experience creates desire for change. Once that emotional energy exists, logic provides direction and justification. The mind seeks reasons to support what the heart already wants. But let me ask you this: how do you create authentic emotional connections without resorting to manipulation or false sentiment? The key is to connect to emotions that already exist rather than manufacturing emotions that do not. Everyone carries hopes they want to achieve, fears they want to avoid, values they want to honor, and people they want to serve. When you connect your message to these existing emotional drivers, you create genuine resonance rather than artificial manipulation. Find the emotional core of your audience's concerns. What do they worry about losing? What do they dream about gaining? What principles guide their decision-making? What relationships matter most to them? These emotional foundations become the starting point for influential communication. Use stories to activate emotions appropriately. Stories engage emotions naturally because they allow people to experience situations vicariously. A well-chosen story can help someone feel the importance of an issue more powerfully than abstract arguments, appeal to identity and values. People feel strongly about maintaining consistency with their self-image and principles. When you frame your message as alignment with who they are and what they believe, you tap into powerful emotional motivators, create urgency through scarcity or opportunity. Limited time, limited resources, or unique opportunities naturally create emotional pressure for action, but this urgency must be real, not manufactured. Once emotional engagement exists, provide logical frameworks that organize thinking and guide action. Offer clear reasoning that explains why action is justified. Present evidence that supports your position. Create systematic approaches that show how emotional goals can be achieved practically. The logical component must address practical concerns. How will this work? What are the costs and benefits? What are the risks and safeguards? What steps are required? What timeline is realistic? These rational considerations allow people to commit confidently to emotionally motivated decisions, balance optimism with realism, acknowledge challenges while maintaining hope, address obstacles while emphasizing solutions, show that you understand difficulties while demonstrating why success is possible. This balance creates trust in your judgment and confidence in your recommendations. Use social proof as logical support. When emotions are engaged, evidence that others have made similar choices successfully provides rational justification for action. Case studies, testimonials, and examples give logical weight to emotional inclinations. The master of influence understands that lasting persuasion requires both emotional resonance and logical coherence. Emotion without logic creates temporary enthusiasm that fades when reality sets in. Logic without emotion creates intellectual agreement without behavioral commitment. But when emotion and logic work together, when people feel compelled to act and have good reasons for acting, influence becomes both powerful and lasting. The emotional connection creates energy for change. The logical framework provides structure for implementation. Together, they create transformation that endures beyond the initial persuasive moment. This is the difference between manipulation and influence. Manipulation uses emotion to override logic or uses false logic to exploit emotion. Influence uses authentic emotion to motivate positive change and sound logic to guide effective action. The greatest influence is invisible. Win the mind by giving them ownership of the thought. People resist ideas that feel imposed but embrace ideas that feel discovered. The solution you force upon someone will face continuous resistance. The solution they believe they created will be defended fiercely and implemented enthusiastically. This is why the most skilled influencers plant seeds rather than transplant trees. They create conditions for insight rather than delivering conclusions. They guide discovery rather than providing answers. Their influence is invisible because it feels like internal wisdom rather than external persuasion. Watch the master teacher. She does not lecture students about complex concepts. Instead, she asks questions that lead students to discover those concepts themselves. The student who figures out the principle through guided exploration owns that knowledge completely. The student who memorizes the principle from direct instruction holds it temporarily. Study the effective consultant. He does not tell clients what their problems are or impose solutions upon them. Instead, he facilitates discussions that help clients recognize their own challenges and develop their own strategies. The client who reaches conclusions through guided analysis commits to those conclusions completely. Observe the skilled parent. She does not simply tell her child what to do in difficult situations. Instead, she asks questions that help the child think through consequences and arrive at wise decisions independently. The child who develops good judgment through guided reflection uses that judgment consistently. Here is what most people do not understand. The act of personal discovery creates psychological ownership. When someone believes they figured something out themselves, they become invested in proving themselves right. They defend their insights against criticism and work harder to implement their solutions. But when someone feels that ideas have been imposed upon them, they become invested in proving those ideas wrong. They look for flaws in external suggestions and work less hard to implement other people's solutions. This is not stubbornness. This is psychology. Humans have a fundamental need for autonomy and control. They support what they create and resist what is forced upon them. The art of invisible influence requires specific skills. You must guide thinking without controlling conclusions. You must shape exploration without determining destinations. You must influence process without dictating content. Ask questions that focus attention on key factors. Instead of saying, "You should consider the financial implications," ask, What financial factors might be relevant here? The first statement tells them what to think. The second statement directs their attention toward important considerations, while leaving them free to reach their own conclusions. Share observations that highlight important information, instead of saying, "This approach won't work because of timing issues." Offer, "I notice there might be some interesting timing considerations with this approach." This observation points them toward relevant factors without imposing your interpretation. Tell stories that illustrate principles without explicitly stating those principles. Instead of explaining why collaboration is important, share a story about a team that succeeded through cooperation or failed through internal conflict. Let them extract the lessons rather than delivering the moral directly. But let me ask you this: how do you guide someone toward specific insights without manipulating their thinking process? The key is to focus on creating better thinking rather than predetermined conclusions. Improve the quality of their analysis by helping them consider factors they might miss. What else might be important to consider here? Who else might be affected by this decision? What could go wrong with this approach? These questions enhance their thinking process rather than steering them toward specific answers. Expand their perspective by introducing relevant information they might lack. Here's something similar that happened in another industry. I read about an interesting approach to this type of challenge. Some research suggests this new information becomes part of their thinking process rather than external pressure. Challenge their assumptions gently by asking them to explain their reasoning. Help me understand how you reached that conclusion. What makes you confident this approach will work? What would need to be true for this to succeed? These inquiries help them examine their own thinking more thoroughly. The timing of guidance matters tremendously. People are most open to input when they recognize they need help, but before they have committed to a specific direction. Once someone has announced their decision publicly, they become invested in defending it, regardless of new information. Create space for reflection between providing input and expecting decisions. When you share information or ask questions, give people time to process privately before continuing the discussion. Immediate follow-up can feel pushy. Delayed follow-up allows for genuine consideration. Acknowledge their thinking process explicitly. You've really thought this through carefully. I can see you're considering multiple angles. Your analysis is quite thorough. This acknowledgement reinforces their ownership of the thinking process and makes them more confident in their conclusions. The master of invisible influence understands that people support what they help create and resist what is imposed upon them. By creating conditions for discovery rather than delivering predetermined conclusions, you help others reach better decisions while maintaining their sense of autonomy and control. This approach requires patience because discovery takes longer than instruction. It requires humility because you cannot take credit for insights others reach through your guidance. It requires trust because you must believe that good thinking processes will lead to good conclusions. But the results justify the investment. Ideas that feel self-generated are implemented with more energy, defended with more passion, and sustained with more persistence than ideas that feel externally imposed. The person who believes they solve their own problem will work harder to make that solution succeed. Do not win too soon. Influence grows over time. Be willing to lose the now to win the future. The amateur seeks immediate victory. The master cultivates long-term advantage. Most people cannot resist the temptation to win the argument, prove their point, or demonstrate their superiority in the moment. This immediate gratification destroys future influence. True influence is not built through single conversations, but through accumulated trust over extended time. The person who must win every exchange loses the relationship. The person who wins the relationship gains influence over every future exchange. Watch the manager who corrects every mistake immediately, challenges every questionable decision publicly, and insists on having the final word in every discussion. He may be right in the moment, but he is wrong strategically. His need to demonstrate superiority in each interaction erodes his influence over time. Study the parent who must win every argument with their teenager, prove their authority in every conflict, and have the last word in every discussion. She may establish dominance temporarily, but she sacrifices future communication. The teenager learns to avoid sharing problems rather than risk losing face in confrontation. Observe the expert who cannot resist correcting others' minor errors, showing off their superior knowledge, and proving their intellectual dominance. He may demonstrate his expertise in individual moments, but he destroys others' willingness to engage with him in future discussions. These behaviors satisfy ego but undermine influence. The immediate pleasure of being right costs the long-term power of being trusted. Here is what most people do not understand. Every interaction is an investment in future influence or a withdrawal from influence reserves. When you humiliate someone, to prove your point, you make a withdrawal. When you allow someone to maintain dignity while still learning, you make an investment. The master of long-term influence chooses battles carefully. Some hills are worth dying on, most are not. The skilled strategist saves their authority for moments when it truly matters, and builds credit for those moments through restraint in smaller situations. But let me ask you this: how do you maintain your standards and convey important information without destroying relationships through constant correction? The key is to separate correction from connection, truth from timing, and accuracy from authority. Address errors privately when possible. Public correction creates embarrassment and defensiveness. Private feedback preserves dignity while still ensuring accuracy. The person who receives respectful private correction is more likely to accept future guidance. Focus on the most important issues rather than every minor flaw. If someone makes 3 mistakes in a presentation, address the one that matters most and ignore the ones that do not. Overwhelming people with corrections creates resentment and resistance to all feedback. Ask questions that lead to self-correction rather than making statements that prove wrongness. What do you think about this data point is less threatening? Then this data point is wrong. Questions preserve the other person's sense of intelligence while still highlighting problems. Frame corrections as collaborative problem-solving rather than personal judgment. Let's figure out what happened here. Feels different from you made an error. The first approach invites partnership. The second approach creates opposition, sometimes simply plant seeds for future consideration rather than demanding immediate acknowledgement. That's an interesting perspective. I wonder if there might be other ways to look at it. Leaves room for the other person to reconsider without losing face. The timing of influence matters more than the intensity. One well-timed suggestion given when someone is receptive has more impact than 10 forceful arguments given when someone is defensive. Wait for moments of openness rather than creating moments of confrontation. Strategic retreat can be more powerful than tactical victory. When you sense that pushing further will create resistance, step back and allow time for your previous points to be considered. Many people change their minds privately who would never change their minds under pressure. The master of long-term influence understands that people need face-saving exits from wrong positions. When you corner someone intellectually, they become more committed to defending their position rather than less committed. Give people ways to change their minds without admitting they were wrong. That's a good point. I hadn't considered that angle. Allows someone to modify their position without confessing error. You know, thinking about it more, maybe there's another way to approach this. Gives someone permission to evolve their thinking. The most powerful influence comes from helping others arrive at better conclusions while maintaining their sense of intelligence and dignity. This requires patience because insight takes time. It requires humility because you cannot take credit for others' growth. It requires wisdom because you must distinguish between important battles and insignificant skirmishes. But the person who masters long-term influence gains something more valuable than temporary victories. They gain lasting authority. Others seek their counsel because they trust their judgment. Others share their real problems because they know they will receive helpful guidance rather than harsh judgment. Others implement their suggestions because they feel respected rather than diminished. This is why the master resists the need to win the moment. They understand that influence is not a series of individual victories, but a sustained relationship built on trust, respect, and mutual benefit. They are willing to lose small battles to win the larger war of long-term persuasive power. Surprise builds leverage. When they expect force, offer absence. Confusion is an open door. Human beings prepare for the battles they expect. They build defenses against predictable attacks. They ready arguments against anticipated pressure. But they have no preparation for what they do not see coming. This is why strategic withdrawal confuses and disarms more effectively than strategic advance. When someone expects you to push harder, your retreat creates psychological imbalance. When they prepare for confrontation, your absence creates space for reflection. Most people escalate when they meet resistance. They speak louder when others do not listen. They argue harder when others disagree. They apply more pressure when others push back. This predictable response allows others to prepare countermeasures and maintain their defensive positions. The master of influence does the opposite. When resistance increases, pressure decreases. When others expect confrontation, he offers collaboration. When they prepare for battle, he provides peace. This unexpected response bypasses their defenses and creates new possibilities. Watch what happens in a heated argument when one person suddenly stops fighting. The other person, prepared to continue the conflict, finds themselves swinging at air. The absence of expected resistance creates confusion and often leads to de-escalation. Study the skilled negotiator who walks away from a deal when pressure tactics fail. The other party, expecting continued haggling, suddenly faces the possibility of losing the opportunity entirely. This withdrawal often leads to renewed flexibility and better offers. Observe the effective parent who stops arguing when their teenager becomes defensive. Instead of escalating the conflict, they say, "You know what? You might be right. Let me think about this." The teenager, prepared for continued battle, finds their defenses unnecessary and often becomes more open to discussion. Here is what most people do not understand. Withdrawal is not surrender. It is strategic repositioning. You are not giving up your goals. You are changing your approach to achieve those goals more effectively. Strategic withdrawal serves multiple purposes. It prevents you from getting trapped in unproductive cycles of escalation. It gives the other person time to reconsider their position without external pressure. It demonstrates confidence in your position by showing you do not need to force agreement immediately. But let me ask you this. How do you withdraw strategically without appearing weak or giving up your influence entirely? The key is to frame withdrawal as choice rather than defeat, as strategy rather than surrender. I want to think more about what you've said, positions withdrawal as intellectual consideration rather than emotional retreat. It suggests that their input has value while giving you space to regroup. Maybe we should both take some time to consider. This makes withdrawal mutual rather than unilateral. It creates space for both parties to reconsider without either losing face. You've given me some things to think about. Let's revisit this tomorrow acknowledges their input while establishing that the conversation will continue. It shows respect for their perspective while maintaining your engagement with the issue. The timing of withdrawal is crucial. Withdraw before you become emotional, not after. Withdraw when you recognize the conversation is becoming unproductive, not after it has already damaged the relationship. Withdraw while you still have dignity and options, not after you have exhausted both. Watch for signs that pressure is creating resistance rather than compliance. When someone's voice rises, their body becomes tense, or their language becomes more absolute, continued pressure will likely backfire. These signals indicate the need for strategic retreat. Notice when arguments become repetitive. If the same points are being made repeatedly without new information or insight, the conversation has reached a dead end. Continued discussion will only entrench positions rather than change minds. Observe when the other person stops listening and starts preparing their next response. When someone is no longer processing your words but simply waiting for their turn to speak, withdrawal allows the conversation to reset. The master of strategic withdrawal understands that absence can be more influential than presence. When you are not there to argue against, people often argue with themselves. When you are not there to pressure them, they often pressure themselves. When you are not there to convince them, they often convince themselves. This is because most people carry internal voices that represent different perspectives. When external pressure stops, internal dialogue begins. The person who was defending their position against your arguments starts examining their position with their own critical thinking. Time and space allow emotions to cool and logic to engage. The person who was angry during the conversation may feel differently after a good night's sleep. The person who was defensive in the moment may become more open after reflection. Strategic withdrawal also creates scarcity of your attention and energy. When you are always available to discuss, argue, or persuade, your input becomes less valuable. When you withdraw strategically, your eventual return and input carry more weight. But remember, withdrawal must be temporary and purposeful, not permanent and sullen. You are creating space for better conversation, not ending communication entirely. You are changing the dynamic, not abandoning the relationship. The person who masters strategic withdrawal gains influence because they become unpredictable. Others cannot prepare defenses against someone whose next move cannot be anticipated. They become more receptive to influence because they are not constantly braced for persuasive attacks. Most importantly, strategic withdrawal demonstrates confidence and patience. It shows that you believe in your position strongly enough that you do not need to force immediate agreement. This confidence often becomes contagious, leading others to reconsider their own certainty. The more they know, the less they follow. Mystery creates respect and influence. Predictability destroys authority. When others can anticipate your every move, read your every thought, and predict your every response, they no longer need your guidance. They stop listening because they believe they already know what you will say. Mystery preserves influence by maintaining others' curiosity and attention. When people cannot fully understand you, they remain engaged in trying to figure you out. When they cannot predict your responses, they pay closer attention to your words. When they cannot map your thinking completely, they value your insights more highly. Watch the leader who explains every decision in detail, shares every thought process openly, and makes every motivation transparent. Initially, this openness seems refreshing and builds trust. But over time, subordinates begin to anticipate decisions, second-guess reasoning, and feel they no longer need leadership because they understand the leader's complete framework. Study the expert who reveals all their knowledge immediately, explains every technique thoroughly, and holds nothing back in initial interactions. While this generosity seems helpful, it actually diminishes their perceived value. Once people believe they understand everything the expert knows, they no longer seek the expert's counsel. Observe the parent who explains every rule completely, justifies every decision exhaustively, and makes every boundary transparent, the Sikh child learns to navigate around these known parameters and stops developing their own judgment because they can simply follow the parent's predictable patterns. Here is what most people do not understand. Humans are naturally curious about what they do not fully understand and bored by what they know completely. Mystery engages the mind more powerfully than clarity satisfies it. This does not mean you should be deliberately obscure or dishonest. Strategic mystery involves revealing information selectively and timing your disclosures for maximum impact. You share enough to establish credibility, but retain enough to maintain curiosity. The master of strategic mystery understands that influence requires information asymmetry. When you know more than others know, you maintain an advantage. When others can map your complete knowledge and thinking process, that advantage disappears. But let me ask you this: how do you maintain appropriate mystery without seeming secretive, manipulative, or untrustworthy? The key is to be selectively open rather than completely closed, strategic in your sharing rather than withholding everything. Share your conclusions, but not always your complete reasoning. When you provide solutions, you can explain enough to build confidence without revealing every step of your analysis. This keeps people focused on implementation rather than second-guessing your methods. Reveal your experiences gradually rather than all at once. Instead of sharing your complete background immediately, let relevant experiences emerge naturally during conversations. This creates ongoing discovery rather than front-loaded information dumps. Ask questions that reveal depth without exposing everything you know. Instead of demonstrating your complete understanding immediately, guide others toward insights through well-crafted inquiries. This shows wisdom while maintaining some informational reserve. Use silence strategically when others expect explanations. Sometimes the most mysterious response is no response at all. Comfortable silence suggests depth of thought and confidence in your position. Share contradictions and complexity rather than oversimplifying. Most people expect others to have consistent, simple viewpoints. When you reveal nuanced thinking that holds multiple perspectives simultaneously, you become harder to categorize and predict. The timing of revelations matters tremendously. Information shared too early has less impact than information shared at the optimal moment. Strategic mystery involves knowing when to reveal what you know for maximum influence. Maintain some personal boundaries around your private thoughts, motivations, and decision-making processes. Complete transparency eliminates the space that allows others to project wisdom and authority onto you. Express uncertainty about areas where you genuinely do not have complete knowledge. Admitting the limits of your understanding paradoxically increases others' confidence in what you do claim to know. The master of mystery understands that influence requires others to believe you possess knowledge, insight, or capabilities that they lack. If they believe they understand everything about you, they no longer need your guidance. If they sense depths they have not yet explored, they remain curious and attentive. This principle applies across all relationships. The spouse, who remains somewhat mysterious, maintains romantic interest longer than the spouse who reveals everything immediately. The friend who has hidden depths maintains fascination longer than the friend who is completely predictable. But remember, mystery without substance is eventually exposed as emptiness. True strategic mystery is built on genuine depth, real knowledge, and authentic capability. You maintain mystery not because you have nothing to offer, but because you have so much to offer that revealing it all at once would overwhelm and ultimately diminish its impact. The person who masters strategic mystery gains lasting influence because they remain perpetually interesting and valuable to others. Do not seek domination, seek direction. The wind bends trees not by crushing them, but by constant pressure. Control breaks what it seeks to command. Influence shapes what it seeks to guide. The difference is not intensity, but approach. Control forces compliance through fear of consequences. Influence creates alignment through understanding of benefits. Most people confuse these concepts because both produce behavioral change, but the mechanisms are opposite, and the results are opposite. Control creates resistance that builds over time. Influence creates cooperation that strengthens over time. Watch the manager who rules through threats, deadlines, and consequences. His team performs when watched, but slacks when he is absent. They comply with the letter of his demands, but violate the spirit. They do exactly what they must and nothing more. This is control, temporary behavioral modification through external pressure. Study the leader who guides through vision, support, and inspiration. Her team performs consistently whether she is present or absent. They exceed expectations because they understand and embrace the mission. They innovate and improve because they are invested in success. This is influence, permanent behavioral change through internal motivation. Observe the parent who manages children through punishment, surveillance, and rigid rules. The children obey when consequences are immediate, but rebel when supervision decreases. They learn to avoid detection rather than choose good behavior. This is control, compliance without conviction. Now, watch the parent who influences children through explanation, modeling, and guidance. The children make good choices even when no one is watching because they understand why those choices matter. They develop internal judgment rather than external compliance. This is influence, commitment with understanding. Here is what most people do not understand. Control requires constant energy to maintain. The controller must always be present, always be watching, always be ready to enforce consequences. Control exhausts the controller and creates resentment in the controlled. Influence, once established, becomes self-sustaining. The influenced person continues in desired directions because they understand why those directions serve their interests. Influence energizes both the influencer and the influenced because it serves mutual benefit. But let me ask you this: how do you create direction without crossing into control? The key lies in the difference between shaping choices and eliminating choices, between guiding decisions and making decisions for others. Direction respects autonomy while shaping options. Instead of telling someone what they must do, you help them understand what they could do and why some choices serve their interests better than others. The final decision remains theirs, but their decision-making process has been improved. Direction focuses on expanding understanding rather than limiting freedom. You provide information, perspective, and framework that allows others to make better choices independently. You increase their capability rather than constraining their options. Direction aligns interests rather than imposing will. You help others see how their goals can be achieved more effectively through specific approaches. You show how mutual benefit is possible rather than demanding submission to your preferences. The master of influence understands that direction works like water. It finds the natural path and flows along it. Water does not fight against the landscape. It follows the terrain while gradually shaping it. Similarly, influence does not fight against human nature. It works with psychological tendencies while gradually guiding them. Study how water shapes stone. It does not assault the rock directly. Instead, it finds cracks and weaknesses, applies gentle but persistent pressure, and gradually creates change over time. The rock is reshaped not through violence, but through patience. This is the model for lasting influence. Find the natural inclinations, values, and motivations that already exist in others. Apply gentle but consistent pressure in directions that serve both their interests and your goals. Create change gradually through accumulation of small influences rather than dramatic confrontations. Direction requires deep understanding of those you seek to influence. You must know their values, fears, desires, and constraints. You must understand what motivates them and what limits them. This knowledge allows you to work with their psychology rather than against it. Unlike control, which treats everyone the same, influence must be customized to the individual. What directs one person may alienate another. What motivates one personality may demotivate another. Effective influence requires adaptation to the specific psychology of each person. The ethical foundation of influence as direction is mutual benefit. You guide others toward choices that serve their legitimate interests as well as your own. When influence serves only your interests at their expense, it becomes manipulation. When it serves their interests as well as yours, it becomes leadership. This is why the master of influence invests time in understanding what others truly need and want, not what they say they want, but what would actually serve their deeper interests. Sometimes people resist what would help them because they do not understand its value. True influence helps them see that value clearly. The person who masters direction rather than control gains sustainable influence because they become valuable to others. People seek guidance from those who help them achieve their goals more effectively. They resist control from those who constrain their freedom for external benefit. The wind that bends trees does not break them because it allows them to maintain their essential nature while adapting to new conditions. This is the model for lasting influence, respecting others' autonomy while guiding them toward better choices, maintaining their dignity while helping them achieve their goals. The one who cannot be swayed sways all others. Influence begins within. All external influence flows from internal mastery. The person who cannot control their own emotions will never control others' responses. The person who cannot manage their own thoughts will never manage others' opinions. The person who cannot influence themselves will never influence anyone else sustainably. This is the final principle that all others depend upon. Self-mastery is the foundation of all influence. Not because you need to be perfect, but because you need to be centered. Not because you must have no weaknesses, but because you must not be controlled by your weaknesses. Watch the leader who remains calm during crisis while others panic. Their composure influences everyone around them, not through words or commands, but through presence. Others unconsciously mirror the energy they project. Calm leadership creates calm teams. Anxious leadership creates anxious teams. Study the negotiator who shows no desperation even when they need the deal badly. Their indifference to outcome paradoxically makes the outcome more likely. The other party senses their internal strength and becomes more willing to accommodate someone who clearly has options. Observe the parent who responds thoughtfully rather than reactively when children misbehave. Their measured response teaches children that emotions can be managed and problems can be solved rationally. Children learn emotional regulation by witnessing it consistently modeled. Here is what most people do not understand. Others can sense your internal state more accurately than you realize. They may not consciously recognize what they are detecting, but they respond to your energy, confidence, desperation, fear, or strength intuitively. When you are internally scattered, others feel unsafe following your lead. When you are internally conflicted, others sense your uncertainty and become uncertain themselves. When you are internally desperate, others pull away from your neediness. When you are internally centered, others gravitate toward your stability. This is why all influence techniques fail without self-mastery. You can memorize every strategy in this message, but if you are controlled by your own emotions, reactions, and impulses, your attempts at influence will feel inauthentic and manipulative to others. Self-mastery begins with emotional regulation. This does not mean suppressing emotions, but rather experiencing them without being controlled by them. You feel anger without acting angrily. You experience fear without being paralyzed by it. You acknowledge disappointment without being defeated by it. But let me ask you this: how do you develop the internal strength that makes external influence possible? Self-mastery is built through consistent practice in small moments, not dramatic gestures in large moments. Notice your emotional reactions throughout the day. When you feel triggered by someone's words or behavior, pause before responding. This pause creates space between stimulus and response where choice exists. In that space, you can choose your reaction rather than being driven by it. Practice delayed gratification in minor situations. Wait 5 minutes before checking your phone. Choose the healthier food option when you crave junk. Exercise when you feel like being lazy. These small acts of self-discipline build the internal muscle that enables larger acts of self-control. Develop the ability to sit with discomfort without immediately trying to escape it. When you feel anxious, embarrassed, or frustrated, resist the urge to immediately fix, flee, or fight. Learning to tolerate discomfort gives you options in difficult situations. Question your own thoughts and assumptions regularly. Notice when you make judgments about others, jump to conclusions, or react based on limited information. The person who can observe their own thinking objectively can guide others' thinking more effectively. Take responsibility for your outcomes without blaming external circumstances. This does not mean ignoring real obstacles or unfair treatment. It means focusing on what you can control rather than what you cannot. This internal locus of control makes you more effective and more influential. Cultivate genuine indifference to others' opinions of you while maintaining care for their well-being. When you need approval, validation, or agreement from others, they sense that need and it diminishes your influence. When you want the best for others without needing anything from them, your influence increases naturally. The master of self-influence understands that people follow those who appear to need nothing from them but want good things for them. Neediness repels, strength attracts, desperation pushes away, confidence draws near. This is why the most influential people often seem the least interested in influencing others. They have developed such strong internal foundations that they do not need external validation or compliance to feel secure. This independence makes others want to follow them voluntarily. Self-mastery also includes developing your own principles and values clearly, then living by them consistently regardless of external pressure. When others see that you cannot be bought, threatened, or manipulated, they respect your integrity and trust your judgment. The person who has mastered themselves becomes like a mountain, unmoved by storms, unchanged by seasons, reliable across time. Others seek shelter in that stability. They find peace in that presence. They discover strength through that example. But remember, self-mastery is not perfection. It is the ability to recover quickly from mistakes, learn from failures, and maintain direction despite obstacles. It is strength that includes vulnerability, confidence that includes humility, and power that includes service. The ultimate influence comes not from techniques you apply to others, but from the person you become yourself. When you have mastered your own mind, emotions, and responses, you naturally influence others through your presence, your example, and your centered engagement with the world. This is the way of true influence, to become so internally strong that others naturally seek your guidance, so emotionally stable that others find peace in your presence, so mentally clear that others trust your judgment. Master yourself, and all minds yield not through force, but through attraction to the strength they sense within you. You already have what it takes. Now, go prove it.